Hello, so welcome to this talk about the Human Henge project. I'm delighted to be able to introduce the team, but I'll just introduce Laura Drysdale first from the Restoration Trust, who'll then introduce everyone else. So thank you, everyone.
Okay, so I'm Laura Drysdale. I'm director of the Restoration Trust, and we're a charity that involves people who are living with mental health challenges, with heritage and creativity. And luckily for us, we've been part of Human Henge. So my colleagues.
We just lost you, so I'm going to jump in and be a colleague.
Speak after me. Oh, yes, you can jump in and be a colleague.
Sorry.
Well, you're not really a colleague, you're a partner. So my colleague, Mel Rogers, my collaborator, Danny O'Donoghue from the Richmond Fellowship. Mel is a trustee of the Restoration Trust and a member of the Human Henge tribe. Danny O'Donoghue is the locality manager for the Richmond Fellowship and a partner in the project, and he'll tell you more about himself. And Martin Allfrey is the English Heritage Curator that we've been working with on Human Henge ever since it began in 2015, when it was just a germ in our eye, a mote in our eye. So you've got us all, and we're going to speak in the following order. I'm going to start, obviously, then we've got Mel, then Danny, and then Martin. Human Henge is essentially it's a 10-session program with a sort of introduction session and then a kind of concluding opportunity for people to get together and have a sort of final evaluation meeting. And it involves people walking, what we call walking with intent, in the landscape at Stonehenge with archaeologists and artists, musicians. It's always been facilitated, co-facilitated by a wonderful person, an archaeologist, a musician called Yvette Stalens, along with Danny here, and also latterly another person somebody from Rethink called Gavin, and also Martin from English Heritage has always been part of the team who've been welcoming us to Stonehenge and sort of sweetening the path to enable us to be there. English Heritage have been fantastic all the way along about encouraging people to feel welcomed and cared for at Stonehenge itself. So essentially it's a partnership, this project, between the people you see here, also Bournemouth University, where Professor Tim Darville has been the lead archaeologist on the project, and has been very influential in all our thinking and working with it. And the final project that we've been doing at Stonehenge has been actually led by Tim and by Bournemouth University. Then we've also had the local mental health trust have been involved as well, and a psychiatrist called Toby Sutcliffe has been part of our core group. And we've now lost her to the University of Salford, but our researcher, Professor Vanessa Heaslip, has been working with the project too, the whole time since we first began, looking at the mental health and social impact on people of participating in Human Henge. So here we are. This is the latest project, and you can see that the whole program culminates in an experience of being inside the stone circle, and it's a very joyful experience for people, and it is a beautiful culmination of a journey. But I also wanted to show you the slide alongside it, which is another aspect of Human Henge, which is the sort of tribal connection that has developed, where people meet just for pleasure in the landscape. And here, this was a lovely picnic we had at Kingsbarrow Ridge, where people could just be together and enjoy each other's company. You may recognise the person over here on one side who's lounging around in a Neolithic house. That's Danny, and that's part of the experience, is this sort of lovely privileged access to all aspects of the site. And weather is no bar to enjoying Human Henge, as long as you've got an umbrella, as you can see on the right. I wanted to take you somewhere completely different, just to show you the other kinds of things that the Restoration Trust does, just a quick whip through. So we do walks and sort of similar kind of engagement at other sites, and this is Borough Castle Roman Fort, which is over in Great Yarmouth. We have a programme called a Heritage Link Worker programme, which is about social prescribing, and that could be doing something as simple as walking around the place where you live, in this case Lowestoft. We've also got a whole strand of work which is to do with archives, and we do a conservation programme with the London Metropolitan Archives, looking at, which is quite fascinating, with people having a very sort of hands-on experience of archives. And then we also work with mental health asylum archives, and we use those for wellbeing. Just lately we've been doing it, for example, in prison, which works pretty well. Here's a report that we published all about creativity and heritage and mental health. And the image beyond that is of a book that was created by members of people who took part in an excavation led by archaeologists from the Cambridge Archaeological Unit and from the University of East Anglia at Arminghall Henge, another henge, not quite as beautiful though as Stonehenge. Now what I'm going to do now is introduce you to my friend Mel Rogers, and you can see she's an authentic Human Henger, because here she is between some magnificent pillars that I'm sure you know well. So over to you then, Mel.
Okay. Hi everyone. Yeah, so I am I was a participant in the second group of people back in 2018, I believe it was. There were 10 to 12 of us that started, and none of us really knew what to expect, but it was a really interesting time. None of us really knew much about Stonehenge, although I only lived down the road anyway and should have. But our group just gelled. We were just so lucky. Yvette, the facilitator, she was brilliant, and she just made sure that we were all okay. She always made sure that there's plenty of tea and coffee and biscuits and all that sort of stuff as well. And it was an interesting time for us. I think we all learned an awful lot of stuff. We did, we were out on the landscape in the rain and the snow, and we used Yvette's pound shop brollies constantly, so they were really well used. And we all learned quite a lot of different things about ourselves that none of us ever knew, and about all our maybe things, attributes in a way that none of us even realised. So from that project, we had a really great guy called Chris who made us a Facebook page up, and that is still running now, and we all still keep in touch. And usually we would meet up quite often. That hasn't happened so much recently, and of course then we had COVID, that sort of stuff, but it was really good. But also through COVID, the Restoration Trust did something called to help anyone that was in any of the groups all around the country to come on every week, and they did some sort of fun thing. So one week we did a bit of writing, one day we did acting, another time someone was good at a certain type of book making. It was just really good. And every time at the beginning, you had the guy that took it, he would say you got to give 3 words at the beginning of how you felt on that day, and then 3 words at the end. but it was just a way we all kept in touch, really, and I found that really helpful, and I know a lot of people still do now. I think at the moment it's running fortnightly, maybe, or just monthly, because people aren't all around, but it is going really well. And then from that, I did several talks to do with Human Henge. One I remember doing in Cardiff. We went up north to Laura, where we met other people, and they were about to start Borough Castle then. And I always remember it because we stayed in this beautiful place, and we actually were in this medieval hall, and there was so much, when we went out for a walk, there was so much sort of culture around. Even in the graveyards, we were looking at everything and noticing things that we would never have noticed if we hadn't done the Stonehenge project. A lot of us were saying, so that was really good. Then from that, there was an opportunity to become part of something called an advisory board, where some of us from all the projects all around the country would be able to join in and help the trustees with views, or if needed help on certain things that they weren't really sure about. And we were. So I was lucky enough to go onto that board. And from that, I managed to lose quite a lot of weight. And through that, I managed to get T-shirts for the AB board, because these guys are really great. They do so much behind the scenes to help the trustees. I think we got one guy who's really good at sorting out accounts. We've got another guy who's really good at poetry. We've got another guy who's great at doing a blog. So there's all sorts of things through that. And I know through our own group, and from Stonehenge, quite a lot of people have gone on to do things. So we've got 3 people that have gone on to do like mind groups. So they're setting up groups and helping other people. Another chap is doing one of those groups, but he's doing all sorts of things with it. They're doing art groups, they're doing poetry groups, they've just done a play, all sorts of things. So it really is sort of taken off. And we have done several gatherings together. We did one at Old Sarum 2 years ago. Then last year in March, some of the people on the AB board went to London to meet the trustees, and had a great time up in London. So that was really good. And I had the opportunity to put in to become a trustee. And so now I'm a trustee for the Restoration Trust. And I do things like this, I suppose, where I can just really say that I found it an amazing thing. I did go to Norfolk recently, back in October, where I met up with people that I'd never seen before, but only online. And one lady I'd really gotten well with, and Laura drove over an hour away just to pick her up to surprise me. And they had this surprise dinner at lunch thing, and it was just so nice to actually see her in person, but see everyone else as well. And that's what it's about. It's like this spirit that everybody's got. It's like people know that the restoration cares about you. It doesn't matter what your mental health is. No one ever asks. They just accept you for who you are. And whatever group you join or are part of, once you've done that one group, you are part of the Restoration Trust. And that's what it's all about, really. And that's how I feel anyway. So yeah, that's a bit about me. Is that okay?
That's brilliant, Mel. Thank you very much. Actually, I think the one you were on started in 2016.
Oh, it might have been.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah, so it was
very first one.
Yeah.
The second one out of the 2 groups.
Yes.
In the snow, I believe.
Yes.
Started.
I think there've been, in all, I think that, well, there's been, we've had 2 Human Henge. We
did an online Human
with
Henge,
the
didn't we, as well, where we set up one. That was good.
Yeah, that was in lockdown. That was
guys
great.
From that really loved it, didn't they? And they really enjoyed the stuff we sent through the post. And I was going to at the end, don't forget the biscuits and the hot drinks, because that's the one thing we all thought were really great. And actually, one of the things on the form that came back was they were all really excited to see what posh biscuits and posh drinks they got through the post. So yeah, that was good.
Yes. But the last one, as I've said, so we've just had this last sessions have closed, but the research program is still sort of carrying on and moving towards publication now. But so, colleague, collaborate. I'm going to hand over to you.
I imagine that was you introducing me, but you were a bit garbled on your what's it? So I'll assume that it was me and not mine, and jump in. And I suppose just talk about what being part of Human Henge has meant for us as a mental health service provider. So I work for Richmond Fellowship, voluntary sector mental health provider. We work with clients in lots of different contexts. So that could be social inclusion, employment support, or at the kind of sharper end, if you like, crisis care, 24-hour registered care, etc. So we've got lots of different services dotted around England. So we don't have anything in Wales and Scotland, but that's okay because we don't have English heritage there either. So we keep it in the family. And I guess from our point of view, what we really like is being able to deliver services that are not in clinical settings. So it's that the normal, normal spaces, sometimes quite exceptional, special places, but definitely not a clinical setting, because not many people kind of find the prospect of popping down the dentist to enjoy the soft furnishings and the paint job that they've done. It's not what they're after, but you invite somebody to go to a museum and it's like, yeah, actually, you've already got me hooked. So it's all about creating partnerships. Sometimes we ask and look to kind of broker those partnerships with different people. Sometimes it's about saying yes. So one of the best things that we ever said yes to was being approached by Restoration Trust to be part of a partnership that was Restoration Trust, Richmond Fellowship as a mental health provider, English Heritage and the National Trust as sort of heritage providers, and Bournemouth University, who brought kind of expertise and facilitation. So it's that bit of what are the ingredients that have worked for us as Human Henge. And I actually prepared for this talk, which is very unusual for me because I had an hour in between work finishing and coming here, so because I wasn't going anywhere. So so I'll actually look at my piece of paper. Essentials, kind of, I suppose the key elements were kind of the essentials, which are facilities and people, something remarkable combined with expertise, and for me, I think the outdoors and that sense of space. So if you think about the essentials to begin with, and Mel's already touched on this, find a loo, a kettle, a place of biscuits, it's somewhere out of the rain, and you're onto a winner to begin with. So that's kind of probably one of the most important things, and it's certainly the first thing that you experience coming into a strange group or a group of strangers as an individual, and often nobody has met anybody else before they come in, come to these spaces. So that welcome is really important, and it is a thread that runs through kind of all of the feedback that comes out of it, and it's just a very human thing. So that warm welcome and very kind of non-judgmental. What's really nice is when you get somewhere like the education space at Stonehenge, or the meeting room at Devizes Museum, because what you get is you get a welcome space in somewhere that's really quite unique and special. So you've got this kind of safe space from which you can kind of foray forth and satisfy your curiosity and do the things that you're looking to do, but there's always somewhere to kind of come back to that is reassuring. So from a mental health perspective, that's always a key element for us. So the other thing is that the people, so one of our previous participants was saying, it's not that you need to know what everybody's been through who's in the group, you just need to know that everybody in the group has been through something, and that makes it a kind of a level playing field to enter into that. Julie said, for possibly the first time in my life, I was with the in crowd rather than being on the outside looking in. I was with a group that understood me without knowing me, but without judging me. And I think that's one of the kind of key elements of what makes this kind of project work. The other thing is transport. So I think transport for us, we've always been able to offer transport. One of the good things about that is rather than just having a particular date and a time where you know to turn up somewhere if you fancy it that day, if somebody comes to your house, you kind of create a partnership that you've struck a deal. So it's much easier to say yes and to come out, and it's much harder to say no. So I think that's one of the things that's kind of really worked for us. And we live in Wiltshire in the middle of nowhere, so having a minibus and some cars and stuff like that, worth its weight in gold. So then there's the remarkable, which is the sort of fascination of artifacts, and the detective story that goes with finding out about things in museums, in landscapes, the stories that kind of really bring things to life. And there's a sense of revealing things. So I think there's a little bit of theatre involved in all of this. And the challenge is actually hiding Stonehenge when you're there for 10 weeks, because you don't actually kind of want people to do it until the last week. So it's that kind of, oh, look, there's a squirrel, so that people don't know that there's a really big monument over there. So that is one of the kind of entertaining elements. But what is special about Stonehenge, so for us, we go there for 10 weeks, and there's this kind of build up, there's this circuiting around the stone circle. And then in the last session, we get privileged access. So we get an hour inside the circle before Stonehenge proper opens. And it's the experience, I think, of going inside the circle is a real sense of privilege, and it changes your perception. So Stonehenge is kind of big, but it's not big in the great cosmic scheme of things. You know, the pyramids are big. When you look at Stonehenge, sometimes it kind of seems actually quite small in the landscape. It's a huge landscape. But to actually stand inside it is really kind of quite transformational in terms of like, actually, this is a really big space. And I think it's that sense of privilege in being in there, and the reminder of how special you are as an individual, as a participant. It's like, you know, people make this effort for you, and it helps you recover that sense of self-worth and value, I think. None of that really works without the experts to interpret for you. And I'm going to read from Richard's commentary just about what he enjoyed. So he was a recent participant, what he enjoyed about experts. So he says, I especially enjoyed the fact that various speakers and experts provided and donated their time and didn't treat us any differently. We were allowed to openly discuss whatever we wished. And in my personal case, if my viewpoint differed from theirs, they wouldn't simply agree with me or placate me. They'd offer a valid argument against my opinions. And in one particular instance, I was actually shut down quite firmly. And that was one of my most precious memories, because it reminded me I'm a real person with a real mind, with real opinions, and not simply somebody with a mental health problem. And it's that kind of richness of experience, which I think is kind of, you know, one of the great things about Human Henge. And another thing that he sort of said was the other great thing about prehistory is there's no written history that goes alongside it. So it's easier, as he says, it's mostly theories, conjecture and opinions. So they can be very educated theories, conjectures and opinions, but it's that ability to kind of just enter into that conversation, be taken seriously, and then people, what comes out of it, as he says, grows organically, with many people providing poetry, writing, photographs, and even homemade cakes. So we did have quite a thread running through the last session of somebody bringing homemade cakes. So one of the things that kind of prehistory allows, which I think is kind of intellectual room for thought, the whole of that Stonehenge landscape allows for a sense of space. So I think what's really important is where it's located. You don't end up necessarily being stuck in a particular location, and if you're not having a good day, that feels kind of quite an intense experience. So I think access to the outdoors is has been a kind of key element for us, and you can escape without leaving when you're outdoors, because you can stop to look at something, you can walk a little bit further ahead, and you can get into your own space without leaving the group. And actually, if you're managing your own mental health, that's really valuable. So there is something about that extraordinary landscape, which is rich in all sorts of different ways, which has proved really kind of beneficial for us. One of the things I like about heritage as an intervention for well-being is that it's everywhere. So everywhere has a history, and it's stories about people for people. So I think one of the things that's going, that I look forward to, having thoroughly enjoyed being a participant myself in each of these Human Henge experiences, is seeing where we can go with it. What does that look like in an industrial landscape? What does that look like in Swindon? Looking at the railway, the history of farming and stuff like that. What does that look like, over in Weston-super-Mare, wherever it is, because there is history and therefore stories about people everywhere, and that can be really inclusive. And it's that being everywhere makes it available to everybody. So it's you don't need to be able to access Stonehenge to have the value of a Human Henge experience. We've done it at Avebury, as Laura said, but I think you can do it anywhere, and people are using heritage really creatively, really imaginatively, for wellbeing interventions, not perhaps more conventional kind of perceptions of education or leisure, which can actually feel kind of quite privileged or off-putting for people in certain respects. So I think I'd love to see that being kind of rolled out en masse. And then just from my own perspective, I thought selfishly I'd say, what did I enjoy about being part of Human Henge? And I think it's that thing of like, I'd like to think that whatever services we deliver, it's something that I would want to go to on a good day or a bad day in some ways. So I think, these are services that we deliver for our kind of, our friends and our family, our brothers and sisters, our partners, etc. And there ought to be nothing in the way that we deliver those services that we wouldn't be pleased to either deliver to the people we care most about, or to be in receipt of ourselves. So that's one of the things that I've really enjoyed so much about this kind of privileged access, and the way in which organisations come together, and there is a cost attached. But sometimes that is about just allowing access. It's waiving the cost that would normally be there. So admission to Devizes Museum or admission to Stonehenge, you waive that cost. There are other costs involved because you've always got staff and you allocate space and stuff like that. But I think that's kind of something that's really important. It brings it back to the essentials are the partnerships between everybody who's involved. So it's the organisations, it's the facilitators, the experts in their field, the support workers. So we've had a fantastic partnership working with Rethink. So Rethink is a mental health provider, and as Laura said, the support that their volunteers and staff provided to participants all the way through was worth its weight in gold. But probably the best thing about any Human Henge is the participants. So it's basically everybody ends up being on a level playing field. So you kind of work out very early doors that the only way to do it is to join in, and that's everybody kind of like just drops their shoulders a little bit, relaxes into just enjoying the experience and the collective kind of wisdom of a group and what they have to share, the richness of that conversation, some of its history, some of its poetry. There is extraordinary expertise in any group, as you listening to this talk will know. You'll all have extraordinary abilities and insight and knowledge about particular things, and being able to share that when other people are in the room and kind of going, I like that, I'm interested in that. Collectively, you just can come away from that just thinking that was amazing, and that was just us. There's something ordinary about that, and that's part of what makes for recovery, where people are reminded how capable they are, and they do what they do in spite of all the challenges that they face. And people kind of forget that. So you just sort of think for all of the the kind of courage and the good humour that people bring to Human Henge, that's the thing that I get a real kick out of. So I'm going to stop you. All right. Well, no, I'm going to let Richard. So, and Richard was just going to say, he said, the point I'm trying to make is this: Human Henge works, although to be more precise, it works for me. I've experienced a great deal of treatment for mental health, from chemical to electrical, from psychological to social, and always the favourite, cognitive behavioural therapy. But in all honesty, Human Henge is the first that actually achieved anything worthwhile, at least for me. And what it gave me was hope. And it helped lift the veil, personal darkness, to expose emotions and rekindle passions. And that's why I'll always remember it. There we go. And now you can shut me up.
Yeah. Oh, that note. Over to you, Martin.
Thanks, Laura. I think you're passing over to me. Your speech is only coming through in parts at the moment, so hopefully that's not all of us, and hopefully you can hear me. Yep, I'm Martin Allfrey. I'm Senior Curator at English Heritage, and I have, as Laura said at the start, been involved with Human Henge right from the outset, really, when it was just an idea. And Laura Drysdale and Sarah Lunt, one of the other trustees at the Restoration Trust. Sarah had been the curator at English Heritage at Stonehenge before she retired, and so she knew Stonehenge very well. But back in 2015, Laura and Sarah came to me and said they had this sort of germ of an idea, and they wondered whether they could test it at Stonehenge. To be honest with you, I had no idea what it was going to entail at all. There was pretty sort of at that point, pretty scant detail about what was going to happen on site, how long it would be, where it would be funded, all the, the usual questions that I would be asking as somebody dealing with what I might call normal projects. And Human Henge is definitely not a normal project in the terms of day-to-day projects that we run at English Heritage. And so there was an enormous element of trust that came across. It was very clear that the Restoration Trust and Laura and her team have experience of doing these things before, so that was really critical for us. We could see that there'd been successful projects in Norfolk and elsewhere. So, Laura's team came with a track record, so there wasn't a big risk in doing this. It was also important that it was a research project. So that partnership with Bournemouth, that appealed to us at English Heritage, because that's something that we want to be involved with as well. We want to use our sites as test beds, really, for looking at how sites can impact on people. But also there was a really strong team, not wanting to flatter Danny and his team too much, but again, the practical side of it was covered. We felt, although there was a huge amount of vagueness about what was going to happen on site, I don't know, for some reason, we felt pretty confident and comfortable that it was going to be a success right from the outset, and that proved to be the case. There were no major issues along the way. I was lucky in that English Heritage senior staff supported me when I went to them and said, "You've got this idea, or these people have come to me with this amazing idea. Can we do it at Stonehenge?" And Chief Executive Kate Mather was absolutely behind it. At the very early stage, we put in a bid to the lottery fund to help fund the programme, and I essentially handed the Chief Executive a piece of paper and said, "Please sign this. I don't really know what this project is going to look like, but I know it's going to be a good thing. Please sign up to it." And that was the application that Laura and the team put to the lottery fund, and that was our letter of support. So we've had that almost unquestioning support, thankfully, for the project from the start. And then, of course, when it got going, people realised that it was very successful. And the partnership with Bournemouth is important as well. Bringing Tim Darville, who you'll all know is one of the leading experts on Stonehenge, is really, I think is really important for the participants, as well as, you know, making sure that English Heritage top brass were keen to be involved. But it also, as well, we've given over our most important site. I think it's arguable to say that. And I think that's important. And something Danny said earlier about that sort of privileged access. We've willingly given a lot of time. It has cost the organisation money, there's no doubt about it. We put cash into it as well as a joint funding to start with, although we haven't done that in the most recent iterations. But we were keen for it to get going, and so we felt we needed to put some cash into it as well. But I think more importantly, it is about our most important site and giving that access to it freely. Access to the education room was important as well, as Danny said. Mel could probably talk about this as well, but having somewhere safe to go back to, to meet at the start of the sessions and then go back to at the end of the sessions, if for nothing else, to get dry and have a cup of tea. That was important. And in the early days, when we just had the back of the cafe as the education space, that was a little bit more challenging for some people, because one thing the Stonehenge Visitor Centre is a peaceful and quiet and space. It's, you know, with 1.6 million visitors passing through there every year, it can be pretty intimidating actually as a space. And so that was a challenge for some people, which for this last session it's been a little bit easier. We've used the education space up near our office, so that's slightly tucked away and it's got a little bit of outside space, which is a secure space for people who just need to take time out occasionally in the group. But so there have been challenges along the way, but overall, I think it has been pretty seamless all the way through. There is sort of as an aside, really, there were other reasons why I felt that it was good for English Heritage to be involved, and that's there's a tradition of using ancient monuments as places for people to go for sort of calm contemplation and to think about, you know, well-being, not necessarily people with serious mental health issues, but just places to escape the everyday for a short time. And that goes right back to really the sort of early days of our organisation. And around the time of the First World War, we were our sites were used in that sort of post-First World War period for employment for people coming back from the trenches. And so they were seen as a place of normality and calm and peace. And actually, there are people who work for the Ministry of Works, also work for the Commonwealth War Graves Commission, and there are huge similarities between the way that monuments were presented to the public with neatly clipped lawns and places where things were controlled and calm and peaceful, and, you know, monuments were rescued from places of sort of like chaos and disrepair and turned into safe places for people to go and spend time. And so that was right across the board with English heritage sites, going right back to the 1920s. But then specifically at Stonehenge, which is a complete aside in a sense, but Cecil Chubb, who gave Stonehenge to the nation, used his wife's money to buy Stonehenge in 1915, and his wife had inherited a large fortune made on the basis of what was, I think, called the largest mental asylum in Europe, which happened to be in Salisbury, the Fisherton Hospital. And so in his attempt to save Stonehenge for the nation, he was actually using money created through a mental hospital. And I often wonder what Cecil Chubb would think about our project. Actually, I think hopefully he would approve. He went on to be a director of the Fisherton Hospital, and there were, as well as people with mental health issues from across England, they were also soldiers returning from the First World War, which comes back to what I was saying about the use of historic sites as places for quiet contemplation and recovery. So that is an aside, as I say. But so where do we go next? I suppose is a point that we're talking about quite a lot at the moment. We've learned a lot from the experience at Stonehenge, from those days where, in fact, Laura mentioned this to me sort of early on, that what English Heritage did at Stonehenge is it allowed them to muck about at Stonehenge, and in a controlled way, but that is what essentially is what we allow people to do. It was safe, it was secure. The monument obviously was not under any threat in any sense, but there was a massive amount of flexibility on how we did it. It involved music as well, and Danny sort of didn't mention that so much, but music is absolutely central to it, as well as poetry, writing, other sort of elements of making things together. We had a lovely session in this last iteration with a potter, where we all got involved. I did it. I've not made pots like that before. We had a great time. So, and people got involved. People who perhaps wouldn't even have sat in the same room together. There's huge strides were made by people in a relatively small space of time. Remarkable, actually, that some people were able to do things that they simply hadn't done before, and that was complete eye-opening to me. It's a world that I've got a glimpse into. I don't know much about, and people who were unable to leave their homes, people who would not be able to be in the same room as other people, people that were not able to go on a bus. There were a few sort of moments where we realised that there were tricky things to deal with when, you know, a participant was unable to go on our bus at Stonehenge. And it's just something that for most of us, getting on a bus is just an everyday occurrence. And there are other people whose lives are so difficult, and we don't always see that. So I've learned a huge amount about how we can use historic sites to help people with either serious mental health issues, or indeed people who just need a little bit of respite and want to go somewhere that's peaceful and learn about the past. We have lots of ideas about taking it forward. Danny just mentioned that it doesn't have to be Stonehenge. It can be other types of historic sites. It can be archives. It can be museums. I know the Wiltshire Museum has helped us as well with collections. So there's a broad range of interventions using historic assets which can help people with mental health issues. We're looking at a project called Scaling Up, and with luck, we will take it nationally. It's early days. We don't have the funding, and it's just yet again, it's just another pipe dream, but it's getting there with our partners. And I was watching Country File on the television last night, as some of you might have been, which was focused on mental health in rural communities. And it's very clear that other people are doing things. There was a surf school in Cornwall, which was working with young people with mental health conditions. And interestingly, that was funded by NHS, and it had reached about 1,000 young people. It reaches about 1,000 people a year. And I think there was one which was looking at working with horses as well. So there are other initiatives which are supported by the NHS and are now mainstream. And our aspiration is that social prescribing involving historic landscapes, like the Stonehenge landscape, just becomes one of those additional strings to a psychiatrist's bow, as it were, and it can be prescribed in the same way. That's where we want to be, and I think we'll get there. But there's a lot of hard work from the likes of Danny's organisation and Laura's, the Restoration Trust and others. But English Heritage is absolutely 100% behind it, and we will continue to offer our sites free of charge and as many facilities as we can offer, and including people like me and other curators and conservators and so on across English Heritage. You asked me, Laura, to say what does it mean for me personally. It's a project that's touched me more than any project I've worked on, which is I had no idea that would happen at the start. And I've met lots of really interesting people, amazing people along the way. But I think perhaps most importantly, it reinforces, or it's yet another reason why the archaeological historic environment is important. It is a way that people can engage, and I think that's essential. Just thinking about this, and when I was a student, one of the essays we had to write was, what's the point of archaeology? And Human Henge is a fantastic example of why archaeology is important, and it means a lot to people today. So last of all, I now consider myself to be one of the tribe as well. There's a sort of equal playing field with participants and anybody who's helped with facilitating as well. So I can't escape anymore. So yeah, that's me.
Well, thank you, Martin. That's fantastic. I think we're due a break now, David. But I just wanted to say, actually, thanks to all of you who've joined us on this call, and just to say on the webinar that when we come back from the break, that in the spirit of Human Henge, which is all about co-production, we're really genuinely interested in your questions and your challenges, because that's what we need is to hear from you. And we look forward to that. David, I think we're going to take 10 minutes.
Yeah, no, I think we'll just carry straight on. We don't normally do a break on these things. But if I can just pick up on what people have been saying as well. And I remember meeting Mel now, because you were on the first group of the participants. And the group asked to come to the museum sort of as an extra session, which I thought was absolutely fascinating. It was great to meet everyone. And as Martin says, the people I met had such a wonderful range of experiences and viewpoints. And it was a really interesting discussion that we had at the museum, and some of the links between the collections, the landscape, and people's personal histories and stories. I found that absolutely fascinating. Because, of course, people in the past had mental health difficulties, just as people do today, and it's something that you don't think about, and very different perspectives on the world around us. So I think let's see if anyone has any questions. I've got one or two just to chuck in as well. Let's see if anyone has any.
David, can I just say, I don't think we've said enough actually to thank you for what you've been as a part of Human Henge, a total supporter right from the beginning.
Well, that's very kind.
Fantastic, offering us, the use of the museum, tours for people, your personal contact with people. Yeah, I think we owe you a lot too.
Oh, thank you. But that sort of almost touches on sort of what is my sort of picking up from what Martin said. A key question for me is, how on earth do we get our sector, the historic environment, museums, archives, we'll call it what you like, are keen to get involved and to help people. How do we bridge that gap with the people who are doing the prescribing? So rather than chucking drugs at people or whatever, that we can make ourselves more open and welcoming, and yet still have the resources to be able to do that.
Well, I think that's one for Danny, actually, because it's all about partnership, isn't it? So yeah.
I mean, I think it's that willingness. I think one of the things is kind of projects like this and publicising projects like this. So the kind of research element that goes with it, and the kind of within the heritage industry, being able to talk about this and the value. So Martin's kind of captured. This is the point of archaeology. It's not the point of archaeology, but what's the point of archaeology? This is a really, really good use for that kind of those assets in the heritage industry. So I think raising that profile so that it is normal to be approached. It feels normal to be approached by, say, a voluntary sector mental health provider looking to deliver an intervention and use those kind of facilities and resources that museums have, that archives have, that kind of National Trust properties or English heritage properties have, and to just make those available for what is the good of the nation, as it were, in kind of very real terms of saying, there's a wellbeing opportunity here. So I think bringing those partners together, because I think if you've got to kind of create the wellbeing provider and create the expertise, it's really difficult. But you've got people like yourself, David, whose task is to improve access to those stories about history, artifacts, the past, and bring that to life. And you've got people like us in the mental health kind of arena looking for very ordinary interventions, that community engagement, and then just finding ways to remind people what they can do and how they can recover those kind of abilities. So I think that being more usual, and as Martin says, becoming part of kind of the prescription of rather than a course of drugs, which pharmacy has a key role to play in mental health. So it's not kind of always one or the other, but it's about just sort of saying, well, actually, here's a real a really kind of potent intervention, and it will speak to certain people in ways that nothing else will. Those young people who go to surf school on the NHS, they would never have gone to anything else, and it spoke to that group of people. And there are people out there for whom heritage will do exactly the same.
I guess one of the things I'd add to that is there's a lot of willingness amongst sort of heritage professionals, but we don't have the skills. And what we tried to do as a project board with this project is, and it's largely down to, I think, Laura's brokering as much as anything, but bringing the right people together at the right time is absolutely critical, because I could come up with all sorts of ideas about doing things on sites, but I don't have the skills, I don't have the knowledge, and it's critical that this is done properly. We need professionals like your organisation, Danny, and there is people need to be safe, and it needs to be managed. There are risks involved in doing this, and we're fortunate that we've never had anything go seriously wrong on any of our programs, but it could happen, and so the programs need to be run professionally. I've sort of slightly flippantly said it's mucking about. In many senses, it's far from mucking about. You need to look at the number of risk assessments and the professional nature of everybody who's been involved. The key was, people like you, Danny, that that's not what comes across. We know that it's underpinned by professionalism, and we know that you or your team, you and your team are around, and same with your team, Laura, you are around to provide that support. What we're doing, and what, you know, speaking for David here, what the Wiltshire Museum can do as well, we can give you our assets, you know, which they might be access to the landscape, access to the stone circle, access to collections and the meeting rooms. But we are, and always will be, reliant on organisations like Rethink, Restoration Trust, the Richmond Fellowship, and hopefully others in other parts of the country in due course, to provide those, you know, all of those safeguards and the programmes, working alongside people like Tim Darville and Yvette Stalens who manage the programme itself.
I mean, a core asset, David, is not just the objects and the places, but the people. And I think that maybe heritage professionals underestimate their own ability to engage with people. It doesn't have to be only the education and outreach officer that does it. You know, anyone who's really interested in something and knows about it is going to be interesting. And if that needs to be mediated, well, then you can have the skills around that can mediate it. I don't know what you think, Mel.
Well, I was just thinking, actually, going back to our group, we had a gentleman called Chris who worked at Stonehenge as a volunteer. And I remember the second week, we did a walk down one of the cursors, and I'm slow at walking, and Sarah hadn't been before. So we were just sort of chatting together, and he was with us. And he was great. He was just chatting away sort of to us, and he didn't ask any questions, but he was just really nice. He sort of said what he did. He swam, and he said he did lots of competitions, and it was just great just to hear, you know, what this guy did as well as what we sort of had done before. And it really made me realize that we were all individuals, but also we were all the same. As Danny says, you know, we are all the same. You do feel as if, you know, you've got 15 Daniel O'Donoghues or Martin Allfreys or Laura's, because we did feel that we were all part of one thing together. Nobody was in hierarchy or anything like that. And that's the importance as well, the fact that you know that if something does go wrong, there's someone there, but also the fact that everybody felt that they could just be who they wanted to be. As Danny said, you could go off if you wanted to, just for a bit of quiet, you know, all sorts of things. But no, for me, I think, yeah, definitely it was having the people there that knew a bit about Stonehenge more than we did, and we were able to ask extra questions, and it just felt, I remember by the third week I was actually looking forward to going, which sounds really silly, but you do get really stressed about these things, as Martin says, people getting on a bus or whatever. But after that sort of the third week, that I didn't even realize, I don't think, that stress is gone. And I really look forward to the next one. And for me, I finished early, so I was really quite upset. So I didn't actually get to go into the same circle, except the photo that Laura showed you. Danny and Sue, who was my peer worker through the Richmond Fellowship, they took me on another day when they'd asked Martin if we could go in the same circle. And the day we went, we had hailstones, we had rain, we had wind, but it was the best hour we'd ever had. And I'll never forget that, because for me, that was just so special. And yeah, it was just brilliant. So yeah, it was a really good time.
Stonehenge weather at its best.
Definitely, yeah.
Okay, we've got a question from Sarah. Very interesting project and a really good idea. Is there any follow-up for participants? Can they go on to get involved in similar projects afterwards?
Well, thanks for your question. Maybe I'll kick off, and then Danny can, or whoever can pick up. So Human Henge itself, I think Mel explained that some of the groups continued via private social media groups to stay in touch with each other, and then went on meeting each other informally like that. And but there's a sort of there's an opportunity for people who are part of Human Henge then to join our tribal gatherings, which happen periodically. And also we've always had an evaluation programme, this research and evaluation going on, and that's got built-in longitudinal sort of post-project meetings as well, so that there's a sort of arrangement that people will meet up after so much time for this evaluation, but not just, you know, for a focus group, but also for pleasure, and usually thanks to the generosity of English Heritage back at Stonehenge. And then the Restoration Trust as an organisation, we run these online groups, this Stay in Touch group where people can stay in touch. And so that's another opportunity for people. And in fact, we've got quite a few Human Hengers who come to those meetings. But perhaps Danny can say something about what happens when people have been, you know, when they're no longer clients of the Richmond Fellowship.
So it kind of varies a little bit depending on what opportunities are available locally. So we've had people who have accessed Human Henge and then become involved in kind of conservation land-based community projects that we've run separately to that. You know, other people have moved on to become trustees or volunteers in their own right to run groups because they just sort of said, actually, do you know what's given me sufficient confidence and an appetite. So with support, and sometimes with actually very little support, because it varies so much from individual to individual, we'll go on and set things up. I know 2-3 people who've gone into employment subsequently. So it does vary enormously. It's a real challenge for us to work out how to land softly afterwards, so that there's not kind of like, do you know what, that was great, dunk, and precipitate a crisis as a consequence of that. So there is a tapered end to it, but equally we're aware and we're open about the fact that this does not last forever. It is an intervention which, if you like, probably for want of a better word, where it is time limited. It would be lovely to do things for long term in some ways for whoever wanted it, but for everybody who has access, it's that reminder that somebody else's turn will come next, and it's really just about supporting people around navigating that. But there will be some people who will feel that as a loss at the end, and it's really kind of working with people not to dwell on that aspect of it, but to look at what they gained from the experience and translate that into something positive. So I think that kind of follow on where you've got a mental health provider in the background, and this is a kind of an unusual, this is something a little bit out of the ordinary. There's still a kind of framework or a net, if you like, behind that can support people to kind of navigate that end, but hopefully in a very positive way. And actually, for the most part, those endings are very positive. But yeah, it's endlessly interesting how we kind of navigate that, and you don't want to create dependence, so you're always looking for people to move on, but you recognize that, you know, some people have found something which they haven't had for a very long time, if they've ever had it at all, in terms of that kind of social connection and a feeling of belonging. And how do you manage that when it disappears or recedes? So it's something that we're just alive to.
I guess just as a follow-up to that, what we didn't really explain particularly earlier on is that you don't volunteer necessarily to be a Human Henger. You are somebody who is having serious mental health issues, and you are and long-term serious mental health issues, and you are forwarded or put forward to the Richmond Fellowship or Rethink. I know we have had people coming to us, haven't we, Laura, and saying, you know, can we join? We would love to join and be part of Human Henge. And we've had to say no, that isn't the mechanism through which people become join the programme. It is targeted very much at people with very serious mental health issues of various sorts. Even though we've said all the way along, people leave those conditions at the door and we don't talk about them. We just accept that people have come with various conditions. And then thinking about the sort of after the project, we've had volunteers, in fact, on the most recent iteration, we had volunteers helping us who had been on a previous Human Henge, which was really, really useful for us and for the other participants when people needed a bit of support. And obviously you've got you, Mel, you're a living, breathing example on the screen of what people do afterwards and go on to do new things. We've got another person from the current programme who is going through the training to be a volunteer at Stonehenge as well, in the application process. So with a bit of luck, people will come out the other end of this with possibly a new career, or certainly other opportunities will come forward because it has transformed their lives.
Yeah, as you say, Mel is an inspiring example of how people can progress on. Do you want to say anything, Mel? Because you'll know from sort of your cohort from the other members of the tribe. I must remember it's the Human Henge tribe.
I just think for me I remember one person who really had hated his job and was off due to his mental health, and he ended up going on to work out in outside with the wildlife, and he's still doing that now as a job. And I just think for him, as he said, it did change his life because he didn't really realize that he'd enjoy being outdoors, but actually he couldn't cope with working the job that he was doing anymore, and as he said, it did transform what he was doing. So it's things like that, and there were people maybe that didn't make big jumps or big leaps, or like me, I can honestly say there are still times when you're going through a rough patch or whatever, because when you get mental health, as we all know we do, but then you try to sort of think about all the things that are good that you've done, or things people have helped you with, and really that's why I wanted to be part of doing the Restoration Trust as a trustee, really, just to be there. So then I'm a voice for the people, and think of things that I know people would like, just like the biscuits, and we said the biscuits and the drinks for when we did the online Human Henge. So things like that, really. So yeah.
The gift giving side of it and the reciprocity is really, it's something that we learned about as archaeologists as well, as how important that was in the past. But it became really important as part of our programme. We laugh about the biscuits, but during lockdown, when we were all kept inside and we were in isolation in a way that lots of other people are in isolation all the time, those gifts that came through the post were really important. I really enjoyed getting those parcels because Laura, would send them to all of us. So
yeah, I had some as well. They were really good. Yeah.
It just look forward to, and we managed to sort of put little things from that were associated with the collection, and obviously nothing real, David, but I
think also thinking back, one of the really unusual things I didn't think I'd enjoy, because but we did, and that was we walked out at night on the landscape, and Danny will say as well that was just absolutely, the night we went, it was foggy, we couldn't really see each other, and we thought we weren't going to see anything, and then all of a sudden the mist just went, and we had this amazing half an hour with Tim telling us what all the stars were, and it was just amazing. That was just so special.
I think that answers, because there's a question in the question box, whatever you call it, which is do you meet every day for 10 weeks or just once a week, and what do you do in the landscape, what do you do as part of Human Henge? So I think that's that kind of, it's quite a varied program. We do only meet once a week, so it's typically every Friday. So it is kind of quite a structured programme. Everybody gets to know each other in the first instance. And then it is walking on the landscape. It's such a fascinating, there are so many aspects to the landscape at Stonehenge, that the landscape is as much, you know, the appeal as the stones themselves, you know, the curses, the barrows, fago wood, and so on. So there's a lot of exploring that, and I'm thinking about that in context. As Martin said, we have musicians who will come in, and certainly in the last couple of iterations, we've had somebody who plays reproduction prehistoric flutes, so to the best of our ability to understand how musical instruments would have been structured and what those sounds might have been like 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 years ago. So there's a lot of that kind of interaction. There's a lot coming back and eating tea, drinking tea and eating biscuits. We've had, you know, potters come in. The time spent in the huts, is fantastic. So that first slide that Laura puts up of us sitting in the recreated huts, and they're not huts, they're houses.
Houses.
Yes, someone's Martin going, he says huts one more time. So the houses. And just, you know, that a very, very tactile, very kind of full sense experience. And then and it was that part of kind of thinking about different things that we could do. And there was a suggestion that we go out on the landscape at night, because half of the landscape is over your head. And of course, that's changed very little in the 4,000 years. So it was that opportunity to sort of say, well, actually, this would have been very, very familiar. And what was interesting was how unfamiliar going for a walk in the middle of nowhere in the dark is for people. Why don't people just do that on a routine basis? I don't know. So that became a very memorable experience for people. And a lot of people sort of saying, do you know what, I haven't been out at this time of night with a bunch of people, not, you know, since I was kind of like a teenager and probably up to no good. But it's the extraordinary ordinary. So some of it is that we get into our routines, we get into very particular ways of doing things. And sometimes it's just, you know, like any good teacher shows you something which you think you kind of understand or you overlook, and you see it again with different eyes. So Mel saying about walking around a graveyard post Human Henge and seeing things in a very different way, because you get a sensation, that feel for of the layers and stuff like that. So it's opportunity to do things like that. Hopefully that answers that sort of question. I don't know if anybody else wants to kind of jump in.
I was just thinking that that's a really good question, because sometimes we're so busy sort of enjoying talking about Human Henge that we forget the most basics, like what actually happens. But that is what actually happens, that people actually walk in the landscape once a week for 10 weeks. And everything else sort of goes on around that.
I mean, and we have had, we've had sessions where something's been cancelled, and it's been foul weather, and we've sat in a tea room. So, for example, with Professor Tim Darble, with a bundle of maps. And for some people, that's their most memorable session. But they just sort of said, we didn't go out, we just sat and talked. And this is kind of about midway through the programme, if you like. So week 5, 6, and as Mel kind of intimated, you get a few weeks in and it becomes something just, oh, it's Friday, yeah, looking forward to that. Because you relax and you're comfortable with the people that you're with. And those can be fantastic conversations. And sometimes it's just that. It's kind of being with other people, sharing interests and kicking ideas around, which is, you know, that's what good mental health intervention is.
Or Martin online going around the store.
Yeah,
at Temple Cloud.
Yeah.
Temple Cloud stores.
Yeah. Temple Cloud store is our reserve collections store, so a bit like behind the scenes. I'm sure some of you at least have seen behind the scenes of the Wiltshire Museum. So shelves of boxes of objects, and with our facilitator, Yvette, we just went and tootled around really and looked in boxes, and it was live. The technology worked amazingly, which is a bit of a risk, but it did work. And so we were able to do sort of live in the store, taking questions and answering questions and looking at boxes and so on. So yeah.
Okay, that's been absolutely wonderful. I think it's. I think we'll call it a halt there. We could go on for hours, I think, but it's been absolutely fascinating. So, if I can thank you all very much, so much. So, Mel, Martin, Daniel, and Laura, really amazing talk. And thank you to those that to our audience who've come and listened. And let's hope we have lots more human henges.
Thank you, David, for having us.
Thank you, David. Thanks
Thank you,
everyone for having us.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.